give me a thumbs up or go ahead and respond. Thanks, Kelly. I think you're the only person on camera. There's Heather. Hey, Heather. Hi, Pip. Hey, Paula.
Hi.
Hey, Nicole. There's Holly and Cheryl.
How do I thumbs up?
I think it depends on which version you have. Under the reacting, you can send a reaction.
Oh,
you see
under
that at the top.
Oh, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. They're always doing updates. You never know what you're going to experience. I'm going to go ahead and just turn my camera off just so I can focus on the presentation today. I do have a quick question before I get started. Has anyone that's on the call today did you all attend innovations in the spring? Let me put people's hands down. This is a presentation that I presented before, but I just want to see where everybody's at because I put some new fun things in there. So if you attended, I don't know why I'm struggling speaking, attended innovations and you attended the evaluating outcomes and simulation, will you raise your hand for me?
Grub Hub. Because I still want to, that's a really long class I have to take.
Okay, so that I see Kelly. So who else has their hand up? Dawn. Okay, perfect. Okay, so Kelly and Dawn, since you attended this session before, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and you all can present for me, right? Right, Kelly? Right, Dawn?
You're so funny.
You're so funny. What do you want us to share, Heather? We're happy to share anything that you would like for us to.
I would never do that. I might think about it sometimes, but I would never do it. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at today is evaluating outcomes in simulation. Now, not all of us on this in this session is necessarily a simulation educator, and that's your full-time gig. There are very few of us. And so I'm hoping that you can kind of glean a little bit of some practical tips. We're going to spend some of our time showing how different ways to evaluate or to display our outcomes. While a lot of us do, obviously you're here because you're involved in simulation, it might not be your primary thing. And so I am completely comfortable if you want to make the outcomes about something that is not related to simulation. The goal in this is to kind of for you to get as much as you can out of this and apply it practically. So let's start off with a question. Why do we need to evaluate? Or you can take on the sub question, which is, what data is important to you?
So you need to evaluate to determine if your learner was actually able to learn what you are sharing and to be able to take it back to their teams. So you know how effective you were and if you need to tweak things the next time you present or include additional educational tools.
Awesome. Wonderful, Dawn. That's absolutely correct. Anyone else have any thoughts on what we need, why do we need to evaluate, or what data is important to you?
Well, it could really be a host of things, right, Heather?
Sure.
Like, so from beginning to end for me, it comes all like you started attendance, right? Who's going to be there? Down to each simulation, right? Because there may be, when we did stroke simulation, there are some circumstances where like certain scenarios were handled better or were less opportunities for improvement, in my opinion. So taking back that knowledge to realize, okay, these are these are our areas of opportunities in which we want to define for our population, and can we do better as a team to support our nursing staff in making these clinical decisions. So there isn't hesitancy or concern when doing so.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you, Mandy, for sharing. Anyone else have any other thoughts? We really like these sessions to be interactive so that we can learn from each other. Janice had posted in the chat to see if the learner was able to achieve the objectives of the scenario. Kelly, I saw you on mute, so go ahead and tell me your thoughts.
We also measure, we look for measurable outcomes and improvement of skills.
Sure. And Kelly, just remind everybody what area you work. I'm pretty sure most everybody knows who you are, but just to kind of put
Everybody
context.
knows me. I'm the manager for AHA, and so we have taken ACLS, PALS, et cetera, all of our advanced classes to full simulation, just to give a more lifelike mock codes.
Yeah, and she's done a great job of spearheading that and rolling it out in an incremental fashion as an instructor, who loves simulation. It just makes my heart so happy that we're doing that now. Heather said in the comments, Heather Blevins said, it's important to evaluate to see where you can change or improve things to help with learner satisfaction. And Heather works with our nurse residency program. So between Dawn and Mandy and Kelly and Janice and Heather, we kind of have a different, couple of different roles throughout our organizations represented here. So Janice representing the undergraduate nursing program, Dawn representing clinical practice in the outpatient setting, Mandy inpatient, and Heather for inpatient as well on the nurse residency side. And they've done a great job of implementing simulation as well. And so my hopes today is that whatever it is that you are looking to evaluate, that you can truly know at the end of the day if or how you are making a difference. And a lot of the responses that we just heard is looking at that impact. And so one of the things that is always a hot topic when it comes to simulation is return on investment. And so for today, we are going to kind of shift that just a little bit. Simulation specific, it's very difficult to see that return on investment. Aspects of simulation like Herman and Nicole do, and Mandy in the organization is looking for potential latent safety threats. So we can probably mine some data on, how that impacts, but sometimes it's very difficult. There is an affinity group through the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. They are working on it. Should be published hopefully either this month or next. An article that is looking at not at return on investment, but value-based simulation. You will see the graphic that is represented is looking at qualitative measures that speak the language of our executive leadership. And so it's taking aspects of simulation, which we know impact these 6 buckets that are around this graphic, and focusing in on how we can make those connections on how our education, our simulation, whatever we're doing to promote quality care, to see that impact and having conversation around the right language in which to represent that. And a lot of this comes from having a close understanding with our key stakeholders to know what they value. And that is a part of the relationship aspect, thinking about, Kelly, I'm sure that she has, a different perspective or maybe even a different aspect of this graphic that will represent the value of adding simulation because, and Kelly's using her as an example, most of us have been through AHA training, know that there are various instructors with different comfortability with simulation. And so understanding that it's really important to have that hands-on practice, you have to find a way to say, it's worth the effort. It's worth the investment that we're making in those AHA instructors to encourage and foster relationships because she can see the value and the impact. Kelly also has the opportunity to attend our resuscitation committee, so she's able to see both sides and speak to how the adjustments that they've been making in those trainings are impacting the organization and vice versa. She also gets, information and data from them on areas to improve. And so really understanding, this graphic has not yet been published, so I'm a part of this group, so I asked permission just to be able to show it, to talk about it, to introduce it. And I'd be more than happy to share the article when it does come out, but because there's a little more skin on this rather than just, this graphic and the different buckets that are represented here. And so when we are looking at evaluating or assessing the impact of our simulation, there are several things that are embedded within simulation pedagogy that kind of inform us of what we're doing. Some of you all might be familiar with Kern's 6-step for curriculum development. You will see that this 6-step method came out of medical education, but absolutely applicable to what we do. And you'll see that one of those, the 6 steps, is that evaluation and feedback place. You also might have heard of the Kirkpatrick model, which is looking at how we are analyzing or soliciting the impact that we are making. So you'll see that results oriented at the bottom is measuring that impact that some of y'all were talking about, whereas at the top of it is just looking at the reaction. Are our participants satisfied with what we've produced, whether it's education or it's simulation? This is a little bit deeper, but really and truly, when we're looking at our educational activity, we need to make sure that first, that the activity is accurately measuring what it was intended to measure, and that it also has reliability, so that if we have different facilitators or if we have different people that are assessing the learners, that they all have a level of standardization in what they are doing. And so those are just some fun terms to throw around when we're thinking about and pondering, evaluating our impact. And so as we kind of get into this, there is a lot of back and forth between evaluation and assessment. For our purposes today, we are going to look at evaluation is looking at to see if we've achieved a certain level of achievement. So you can evaluate a learner to determine, do they move on to the next step, or are they ready for, to step into another level of education? And Axel pretty much looks at the evaluation as a summative evaluation, focusing on whether or not they achieved a certain level or merit badge. An assessment, when we're talking about this today, we're going to be looking at performance. Somehow we're measuring their performance. So evaluation will measure like the outcome. The assessment's going to look at performance, looking at, how well they're doing, looking at where they are in a drop in time or along the contingency of like a curriculum or even an experiential model, like seeing where they're at, giving them an assessment. And so when we look at evaluation measures, you will see that Anaxel and the Society for Simulation in Healthcare have published best practice resources that all address evaluation and assessment. And I would highly encourage y'all to look at those. We are finishing up our self-study for our reaccreditation in core teaching, and we're going to be looking at adding systems integration, and all of those things are looking at have standards that tell us how we should be evaluating those activities. So we talked initially about why it's important to evaluate. So what are y'all currently evaluating in your practice, and why is that important? So I'm looking for some specifics, some things that you're looking at. Whether it's evaluation of a learner, evaluation of an activity. You can go either way with this. Go ahead, Heather.
Well, for residency program, we're evaluating several things. We have a Casey Fink survey that they fill out 3 times throughout the residency, beginning, middle, and end, to evaluate their competency level, to just kind of see where they're at in their comfortability with skills and things such as talking to providers and different things like that. We also evaluate their confidence level using the mentoring platform to kind of see where their confidence is just in their overall role. And then, we kind of are evaluating the classes to kind of see, are we up to date with the material that is pertinent to what they need, or do we need to change things based off of kind of feedback we've gotten from previous residents?
Sure. So tell me pick one of those, Heather, and tell me why it's important to you.
I would probably say that the Casey Fink survey that we do is probably the most important, because it gives us an overall view of where they started prior to residency and then where they're at after that first year. So it's not just evaluating residency, but it's evaluating their entire year at Centra, including their time on their unit, their time in the classes such as AHA classes and simulation classes that they've maybe taken. And it gives us an idea of where they are on that Likert scale, as far as their confidence and as far as their competence as well. So it gives us kind of a really overall view of everything. And it's really surprising to see, like, part of the survey talks about different skills, and the skills that we see that they're not comfortable with in the beginning makes sense. Like, doing an IV stick, that makes sense. They probably didn't get to do very many of those in school, but it's very interesting to see at the end of residency some of those skills where they are still kind of struggling, and where maybe we as an organization could provide more education or hands-on experience to help them get more comfortable with that.
That's awesome, Heather. Thank you so much for sharing that example. That's such a great example of, what you're doing and the why behind it. Kelly placed in the comments that they are tracking the most commonly missed questions or sections of the AHA material so they can improve and modify the lectures that are involved. Again, what Kelly and what Heather are highlighting is a process, a quality improvement process. There's information that they are gaining from the evaluation, and they're using that to improve the activity, improve maybe gaps that they might uncover. It's interesting, when we do simulation, we might have certain objectives, but then in discussion and debrief, we find out, oh, there might be a gap here. And, and what do we do with that? And all of that is a part of the evaluation process. Thank you all so much for sharing that. And so one of the ways that was mentioned is, looking at educational success. We're measuring if our education or simulation activity is successful. And so if you are on this this session and you find yourself that you're not evaluating, a good place to start is with your objectives, whether it's a simulation objective or it's an educational objective or it's a goal. Start with that to see whether or not you're actually, accomplishing what you're setting out to do. One of the things that is, especially in particular to simulation, it's an expensive resource. It's not necessarily the mannequin that's the most expensive. You, the facilitator, are the most expensive resource. Your time, your investment, is very, very valuable. And often we don't have a whole lot of excess time. We're wearing way too many hats. And so you want to make sure that your efforts and what you're doing is making a difference. And don't forget, you can look at more than just the activity itself. You can look at, is this modality, so the standardized patient, the mannequin, the task trainer, is that actually helping us accomplish those objectives? Is it helping to keep our audience satisfied and happy with the education? You can take any aspect of that simulation activity or educational activity, and you can start to look at measurements. There are different ways that you can measure. A lot of them, have, different value, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the particular measurements. I do have some validated tools that are available for those of you that haven't started or looking to kind of maybe amp up what you're currently doing. There are all these different ways that we can take some measurements and determine whether or not we are meeting our objectives or informing what we are doing. And so data. And so this is one thing. So one of the things that I am fortunate to be able to be a part of is a part of the accreditation process, where I am able to go and meet different simulation programs and their staff. And it's very interesting. And, a lot of people have a lot of data sitting in buckets, in spreadsheets, or in files that are nothing is being done with. Because often what happens is we get to, the end, and then we have to move on to the next thing. And so often we don't carve out time to evaluate what we're doing. And it's important that when you are evaluating, that you think about it from the beginning, that you pick that one area, whether it's going to be, objectives, or it's going to be reaction, or it's going to be like pre-test, post-test. Pick that one area that you are going to, and then determine, what am I going to do with this data? How am I going to use it to speak to my key stakeholders about the value in what I'm doing? And so you can look at numerical data, like numbers and stuff like that. And I have a couple of like little graphs of that. Or you can be looking at things like perceived impact. How is this making a difference? And you heard from several of the participants today in how they are looking at that perceived impact, and how they're also looking at some numerical data. And so when we're talking about number data, numerical data, a lot of what we are looking at in terms of that is quantitative. So on this graph here, you'll see this is looking at Likert ratings. Most Likert ratings are, 0 to 5. And you can see, the different groups that are using simulation. So this is looking at a simulation program. You can see from this clear graph that this simulation program really enjoys interprofessional education. So you can kind of find the value in that, in saying, you know what, if we're going to spend time doing simulation, we might need to look more at how we can get more IPE activities, because we are seeing that the students really are liking it just by this Likert scale. Additionally, you can look at things like utilization data. Those of you that utilize our virtual learning center know that we need your numbers. We need to know how many learners are coming through, how many simulations they're going through. You can look at contact hours, like how many of the learners, and you'll see a represent here 3 different buckets of learners. Who is the high usage of the contact hours, and you'll see the Allied Health has 450 on this graph. This is all fictitious data, by the way. You can look at pre-test, post-test improvement. All of that is quantitative data. And usually when we have quantitative data, we need to put some thought and some meaning behind it to make sure we can kind of say, okay, this is, the number of hours they're spending in simulation versus this is the number of hours they're spending in the clinical environment. And so you might have to do a little bit more than just represent the numbers. And again, back to that value-based model, we need to look at what is important to our key stakeholders, whether it's a dean of a college, or it's, what our nurse, our center nurse educator, if it's our CEO, who is it that is our key stakeholder, and what do they find valuable? Because coming alongside what they find valuable will help you with your impact. And so what we're going to look at today is some data from a simulation that Herman and Nicole performed recently. We do some in situ simulation work with our pediatric units. For those of you that's not super familiar with our pediatric units at Centra, it is a smaller unit. And so they have been slowly integrating simulation into that unit, looking at the interdisciplinary roles and responsibility on that unit. And this is one of their most recent cases. You'll see on the screen in those colorful buckets are the objectives of the simulation. And so they were looking at the caregiver's response to identifying and responding to a pediatric patient that is having an anaphylactic event. And so from that data, we when we do what are called after action reviews, where we meet with the key stakeholders and we kind of discuss, you'll see some quantitative data on this slide in terms of how many people completed the feedback, because we want to make sure that the data that we're looking at represents the group. So if we only had one person completing an evaluation, you can look at data, it might be great. You might have 100% in all these different categories, but if it's not a true representation of the group, then we probably can't really hang our hats on this data actually measuring the group. And so you will see on this simulation case that they rated their satisfaction at a 94%. Their simulation objectives, so there were 4 objectives, and they rated it at a 92%. We look at their confidence in their skills at a 95%, and then 94% on their transfer to practice. So what we're looking at is for them to kind of commit to how this simulation activity impacted their confidence, and have they identified steps that they're going to carry forward into their future. And so a way to look at this data on like a larger scale, not just a just in time, if you'll see these are the last 3 simulation activities that they've done. And just looking at those things from the other slide, you can see that they have a very high rating of their simulation satisfaction. you can see that their confidence is making an upward trend, that they feel like, they're getting more and more confidence with that. And in discussion, they are wanting more simulation, which are, the actual objectives of the sim is not being explained in the very beginning. And it just goes to show that as you are doing simulation, it will increase their confidence. They'll get used to the simulation activity, and you should see some data that's whether it's quantitative or qualitative data that it's making an impact. And so while we have that quantitative data, let's take a look at qualitative data for a minute, because they both have value. They both have their place. And so qualitative data is more explorative. It will often give you deeper insight to your quantitative data, helping you understand that data a little bit more. Circling back to this model, that's where most of these areas are coming from. Looking at the quality of the simulation impact that it's making, whether it's on a unit, on a curriculum, on a workforce, looking at it from that aspect. So the Centra College of Nursing has loaned me one of their cases to look at. And so they recently integrated a care of the older patient. You'll see the objectives here on the screen, and we'll look at some of the data that they had obtained from a learner feedback tool that they filled out at the end of the activity. And so looking at this activity and looking at the data, one of the things that you can do is, kind of looking at what is important to them. And so from this data, there were, I believe, 8 or 10 participants, I can't remember at this time, or maybe it was 12, that had filled out this data. And one of the questions that they're asked to answer is, what did the team do well? You can do things like, we saw charts previously, or you can do word clouds where you can put the feedback that they're giving into this visual thing so that say it with me. What's most important? What did they think that the team did well? Anybody that's paying attention? What do you think they did well?
Teamwork.
Teamwork, exactly. So this is looking at what is important to them. What did they find value? What did the team do well? And so you'll see some other words in there that were, 1 or 2 offs. Again, it's a small batch of data, but there's different ways that you can represent it. Additionally, they ask a question, what did you like most? And so you'll see these big buckets on the screen. There are 5 of them that they identified. In their responses, they put a little more qualitative data on the, facilitators. And so looking at the data here, we can kind of look at how well our facilitators are doing, the things that they are enjoying from the experience. And you can kind of represent that data this way, just like what they like the most. What did they like the least? And you'll see on the screen, these are maybe potential opportunities that we might need to look at. But one of the things you'll see is that 9 out of those 12 participants said that there was nothing that they liked least. And so you can do what you want with this data. You can dive a little bit deeper. And again, I'm just pulling out some measures that they are looking at. And so what needs to be reinforced was another question, and there you go. I believe Heather was talking earlier about finding those opportunities. Well, here we go. These are some opportunities that they would like to have more experience with. And so you can gather this data and then kind of look into it, dig a little bit deeper into, the roles and responsibility. So often you'll have the group back again so you can build that relationship. and kind of find out, maybe even ask more questions. But you can look at, some of this data, and if you see multiple people saying the same thing, you can kind of group those higher, and maybe that's your target. Again, we're taking this data and we're representing it visually so that we can kind of build an action plan. And so really and truly, at the end of the day, I don't want to leave return on investment out, but at the end of what return on investment is looking for, if anybody remembers this movie, it's all about the money. It's all about the Benjamins, all about the dollar signs. There are ways to mine that data and make correlations. And so I don't want to discount that. So you can look at, a data to show that, your simulation activity is improving their satisfaction with performance. Looking at what Kelly's looking at for the AHA program, looking at, if they're enjoying it or if there are other lectures that they need to go back to. But again, it takes a little bit more to kind of mine the data on the return on investment. And sometimes it's not an exact correlation, but we know that the data moves mountains. So for those of you that shared, or maybe if you haven't shared yet, so what are you doing with your data? I know, Heather, you kind of alluded a little bit of what you were doing with the data, but maybe someone else. What are you doing with the data that you're capturing?
Heather, I can go. We most specifically used the data with our basic arrhythmia class.
Mhm.
And so we've modified that class, updated the class, and modified the class based on the data that we have collected. And that data have been things like the commonly missed questions, but also how long it takes a caregiver to complete each section and making sure that they have the time needed within their work week to complete that section.
It's important.
And what caregiver is most appropriate to put into which class.
Awesome work. Awesome work, Kelly. How about someone else? What are you doing with your data?
Well, Heather, this is Cheryl. We
Share.
look at, I'm working with the students, and we certainly look at their performance from more an assessment than an evaluation. Are they progressing more than have they met? Sometimes they don't meet it, but we feel like they are progressing or hitting getting better. But we look at their evaluations from everything, from prep work all the way through the completion of the sim, and they don't always know what they need. So we don't always adjust based on their opinions, but we do take into consideration every semester, what they say about it.
Yeah. Cheryl, would you mind kind of talking a little bit more about that? Like, how do you look at that data to determine whether or not you are going to do something with it? How do you make those decisions?
Well, some of it is more compiled over time because it's not, I have learned in years that, each class certainly has its own personality and needs and abilities. And we do not act on every semester. If you see trends, we will.
Right.
We've changed prep work. That's been one of our big ones is what do we require them to do? What's most effective for them to show up knowing? That's been probably our biggest adjustment is how do we make them, you best use their time, but also, show up prepared or show up having an idea of how they're gonna, of information they're going to need. And that's probably been our biggest is what did they do to get ready?
Right. It's interesting, Cheryl, as I heard you talk, one of the things that, we haven't really talked about yet is really collaborating with other other stakeholders to have that conversation on what you're going to do with the data. Because you're right, you can chase data and it could be, you got a grumpy group or whatever. But, looking at trends over time is a good way to determine what you are going to do. And to hear you say that you found something that needed improvement and change that one thing and let it go to see if that did improve, it's perfect way that you can use the data to help you.
We also work, we have faculty as well as SIM faculty together, and that's helpful. We collaborate on what do the actual simulation faculty feel like they're seeing, because they get a better overview than we do. I see what my students do in my simulation. They see our students do over the entire time. So we collaborate with them as well to get a feel for what needs to be adjusted.
That's awesome. That's a fantastic example. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Kelly. Anyone else want to share anything about what you're doing with your data that you're collecting? All right, if anybody, go ahead, Don. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. We look at the things that we measure throughout Central Medical Group to determine if we're meeting those metrics. Are we assessing the patient's blood pressure? Are we screening for clinical depression? Are we assessing for falls? And there's more on the list that even Nicole could share. But we look at those things to learn if we're meeting those metrics, and if we're asking those questions within the clinics, and we're heavily involved with IT and pulling that data together, because sometimes it's some education on, what we need to click on the computer. Sometimes it's education on really why are we looking at these things? What is the reason behind the why? Just sharing with educating the teams. And so there's a lot that goes into that. But if we didn't pull those measures and we're not being compliant and assessing our patients appropriately, that affects, again, we're talking about the Benjamins. It all affects reimbursement. So, but really and truly, well, yes, it does affect reimbursement. It really affects the patient and their health.
Yeah.
And what are we doing to improve their health and keep them healthy? So it all ties together.
Yeah. It's so important to keep that focus on patient safety, because what everyone that's involved in this, that's here today, that's what is our bottom line, is how do we have caregivers that can provide a safe place for patients and to do things safely and to improve their health benefit at the end of the day. And so, one of the things that I want to call out that Dawn had mentioned that I think is also significant for those that are on the line is, some of us are not all great at the data. And so one of the things Dawn mentioned is reaching out to IT to get some of that data and to help with some of that data. And there are many people throughout our organizations that are available that can help us if we're at a standstill or if we don't know the best way to capture data. Having those conversations, pulling those people in to help us with those things is, the beauty of why we do what we do and why we have these Grub Clubs, so that if you hear something that someone is doing, that you can kind of reach out to them and be like, hey, I want to hear a little bit more, Cheryl, about how you are measuring that or whatever. The collaboration piece is huge, and making sure that you identify those people to help you, because we're all not maybe not that great at, looking at the data sometimes.
That's right. And so when you reach out, you can basically, in telling IT what we need, sometimes we learn the data is already there. Sometimes we learn that there needs to be a report built. But there are people within our organization that can pull the information and build that report to really reflect areas where we need to improve, areas where we're really doing good, but we didn't think that we were. And so definitely collaborating, even down to the CPT codes? Are our providers entering the right codes, and so that we're reimbursed properly and accurately documenting all the patient's comorbidities and so forth. So it's just a lot that goes into it. So very thankful for the people that pull that information, because that's not me. Thank God.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for elaborating more on that. Yeah, and so, you know, if you're not currently measuring things, or you're thinking about maybe, you know, building something, you know, what are some helpful tools? I'm going to show you just a couple of validated tools that have been used. This one, some of you, I believe some of y'all use this. This is the SET-M, or modified SET-M. This is a very common simulation evaluation tool. It looks at, you know, the different aspects of the simulation experience, and looking at that learner providing feedback on how well they felt. And you'll see that there is a Likert scale on the right-hand side that is used, and a little bit of a you know, space at the bottom for them to write some of that qualitative data in there. Another tool that the nursing education people on the call might be familiar with is the Lassiter clinical judgment model. This is more of a rubric that is looking at behaviors. The rubric breaks it down into, you know, where the learner is at on their expertise continuum, looking at different aspects of their performance and simulation to kind of grade where they are. Again, this is looking at, you know, whether or not they are ready to move on to the next level of clinical judgment. Another thing that people might be familiar with is this crisis resource management. Crisis resource management is came out of the anesthesia realm of things. Operating rooms use this quite a bit, and they are looking at team-based performance. And you'll see that they have their areas that they are evaluating for, how they are using, you know, each other and the resources that are either in the clinical or the simulation space in order to evaluate their effectiveness. Other things, looking at competency, there are competency validation tools. You will see that in this one, it's more modeled similarly to the one that we usually see with milestones in residents, but you'll see that, you know, they have these different areas, and then they have different levels. And so it's looking at where they fall in the mentorship part of what they're doing. So the question that I want to spend the last few minutes of our time talking about is, how can we elevate what we're currently doing? So again, if you're just starting out, start where you are. Whether you're looking at numbers or qualitative data, determine what's important, meeting with those key stakeholders. And then thinking more about, if I start to measure this, what am I hoping to understand? Am I hoping to understand that we've got more participation in simulation? Do I need to understand whether or not we're meeting the objectives? And what is the simplest way to operationalize? So I'm going to pause there for a minute and see if anybody's willing to share maybe one area or something that they're just thinking about, mulling around as we're talking here today, about one area or one aspect that they might improve or start.
Okay, I feel like the only one talking.
You're
today, but-
fine, Dawn. You're totally fine.
But we just were talking about that this last week. We need to start evaluating what we're doing for our diabetic patients as in regards to education, because our diabetic educator is really gone down to part-time to very much little of no time. And we have a huge population of patients that are diabetics, and we want to be able to meet their needs and educating them on diet, medication, and administration, and even down to what's in your grocery cart. So that's something that we're looking at doing and developing within our primary care CMG offices. And so that is brand new, and hey, it's an old problem, but it's brand new as far as we're looking at what do we do with all this, and how do we handle it best to meet the needs for our patients.
All right. So so have you gotten to the point of what you're going to look at measuring yet, or are you just starting?
So we have only met with the diabetic educator and learned like what she does and the education that you have to have, or the hours involved with what you have to have under your belt before you can test. And so it's more to it than it's more to it than we realized. And so I'll have to go back and review all the things that she shared, but we are going to meet about this, the diabetic education, and really see how we can support our patients, whether it's offering a class or doing individual sessions, or doing it to a group of patients, and where we should do it, the format we should do it in. Should we have I feel like we should have not just meeting, but also have pamphlets to give, diet samples, all kinds of literature, so the patients can go back and read it later. It's a lot to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, and
It's a lot
thinking
to
early
it out there,
on
too.
about how you're going to measure whatever you end up doing, whatever that intervention is. Seeing if you have to, meet again with IT to find those numbers and the data, or how you're going to manage that. It is a lot. And often when we get into this, sometimes it does become a little bit, overwhelming. But if we start with, what's important for us to measure, like Dawn just shared about the diabetic education that they're providing for the patients at the CMG group, thinking a little bit more is, once I decide how we're going to measure it, then how am I going to organize it, and who am I going to share it with? Hey, Mandy, I see your hand. Do you want to share something?
Yeah, so I was just,
Awesome.
I think this is a really interesting conversation, and this may be a little bit more geared away from, you know, from, I guess it's just more of like a personal story and kind of how
Sure.
things went for me. So being the stroke supervisor, people, when I stepped down to move to business strategy, people didn't have a quite understanding, because they're like, we thought you loved this. Like, this is what you're passionate about. It is. I just am taking it to the next level, right? Like, in my mind, because it was very easy for me to say, from like a quality perspective, these are the things that we need to do. But you have to have the financial backing and informatics piece in order to be able to push quality um, those quality initiatives forward. And so that's what I was really hoping to do. And that is what I'm currently trying to do in my role as business strategist for Brain and Spine. So a little bit away from the simulation side of things, but like how important and I love data, right? But trying to help, I try to find myself, I tell myself I'm being a liaison, right? Between my physicians and our caregivers to our administrative individuals, right? Because you
Yeah.
have some that are solely focused on finance, or I would say more focused on finance. I still think quality is important to them. But then you've also got the quality of care that, our boots on the ground want to provide, and how to bring that into a space where we're leveraging both and still aligning. I mean, I know not everybody is central on here, but aligning with like our system goals and metrics, and doing that within the service line to really push us and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Again, people ask, why do I do this? It's for the community. Centra's home to me.
Yeah.
So, and it's for our patients. So same thing that kind of Dawn was saying, but I just think it's interesting. I think it very much applied to like how I've gotten to where I am today. I loved being stroke supervisor. I love doing simulation, but there comes a time where like I saw a gap based off the data
Mm-hmm.
that I was collecting for stroke and where there was an opportunity for improvement. And I saw that within this role. So
That's
just kind of
awesome.
like a personal, share.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, it leads you to other things, and that's often what we find. We find that there is this opportunity for you. It was a professional opportunity where you can make a greater impact to the community, the end goal there for yourself. So it was a great personal story that kind of ties into what we're talking about with our individual activities. And so we are slowly running out of time. This is my last slide. And what I want to encourage everyone on this call to think about, this is not easy work, but we've identified some people that are doing some good things and sharing their what they're doing. Even Mandy sharing how much she loves data. Did you all hear that? So maybe you can tap into her expertise. But wherever we find ourselves, if we're not measuring something or we're currently measuring something, taking the time to think about how can I elevate the current process that we're doing? What can I do to take those next steps to either share with key stakeholders, make it functional, like a dashboard or whatever. How do I show the value on the impact that we're making, whether it's simulation or education, or even if it's just, some sort of improvement project. So I encourage you all to kind of think about how you can elevate your current process. And obviously, the people that shared today, I'm sure they would love to have a conversation if your brain's, turning. And anyone at the Virtual Learning Center would be happy to kind of, banter about and kick things around. And of course, I'll always make myself available as well. But I hope you enjoyed today's Grub Club, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.